Hello, everyone. Today we have a special guest on our show. He's one of the most influential tennis journalists around the world, thanks to his work for the New York Times, The Racket, and No Challenges Remaining podcast, and his tweets, which indeed cater profound opinions throughout the world when it comes to tennis. Based in Washington, D.C., please welcome Mr. Ben Rothenberg, one of the leading voices in the sport.
Thank you for having me, Maha. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. And how are you feeling today?
I'm doing pretty well. I head to Australia tomorrow, so getting ready to start packing for that trip soon. I probably should have done it already, but yeah, I'll be excited to go back there.
Okay, so January is summer in Australia, unlike the Northern Hemisphere. And it's also tennis in Australia. So which city will you be flying to tomorrow?
Melbourne. I'm just going to Melbourne on this trip. Yeah, I'll be there for during qualies and the main tournament. Yeah, a lot of times I've gone earlier and gone to Brisbane or Perth, or I went to Auckland once, but yeah, just Melbourne this time.
Okay, straight away to the Grand Slam. So what are your expectations for this year?
It's maybe a little bit more complicated with Djokovic having an injury potentially on his wrist. Although he's had a lot of injuries before in years heading up to the Australian Open, it's never really ultimately affected the results. So I think Djokovic still probably remains a pretty safe pick, considering this injury is not different than the other ones have been. And on the women's side, I think it's fairly wide open potentially. Although Iga, I think, is still the player to beat. Iga Swiatek.
Yes.
I've seen a bit of her this week, and she looks very sharp. And so yeah, I think that she's never had her best results in Australia. I don't think she's made she made one semifinal there. But that's as best as well as she's done. So not her favorite conditions maybe, but I think she should still be probably the player to beat. So kind of boring picks for me, Djokovic and Swiatek, and those are the safe picks right now.
Okay, good to know your opinion. So we'll come back later onto the Australian Open topic, but first of all, I would like to congratulate on your recent project, the book,
thank you.
which will be hitting our bookshelves on 9th of January. So many congratulations on that. And I'm personally very excited to get my hands on the book. It has been really very topsy-turvy for Naomi Osaka, and also like she has entered a new chapter. She's starting a new chapter of her life. So how did this idea germinate to write a book on Naomi Osaka's career? How did you initiate that? So please take us through that.
Yeah, so it was an idea I had most I think clearly around the 2020 resumption of the season of tennis from the pandemic, when the tour was coming back in New York. They were holding a tournament in the bubble they'd set up in New York. The Cincinnati tournament was being held in New York that year, and also the U.S. Open. And it was during actually the day where Naomi stopped play because of the Black Lives Matter protests. She was following in the lead of what was happening in the NBA, and she said she wasn't going to play on the day of her semifinal, and then ultimately the entire tournament shut down for the day, basically following her lead. And so I was just really struck by how remarkable that sort of stand was. We just don't see much of that in tennis at all. Players taking clear activist or political stands, whatever you want to call it, and especially from Naomi, who'd been someone who I'd known for years as being so shy, to find her being the one to really stand up and disrupt things. I was very struck by it, and wanted to know more about and write more about. And as I was sort of looking into her in coming weeks, I found realized how little there was sort of known about her early life. Before she won the US Open, there was not a lot of coverage of her. And even then, I still don't think that it really filled in a lot of the early gaps very well. So I wanted to write about her. I felt like a book was the best medium to do that. And I think it's been an interesting project, because Naomi has had, as you said, topsy-turvy. I mean, it's been ups and downs even since I had the idea to write the book. So she's been a moving target for sure to try to get in focus in my book, but hopefully I was able to do it in the end.
So I think it was in the year 2020 when you started off everything, when Naomi Osaka won her US Open that year.
That was when I had the idea, yeah. And then I started more formally actually writing and reporting on it probably about a year later in 2021.
About a year later.
Yeah.
So it's been more than 3 years, I would say, the entire
More or
process.
less, yeah. More than 3 years since the original idea, and then more
Mhm.
working on it really starting in like fall of 2021.
Okay. And how did that entire process go? Were you in contact with her every now and then? Were you talking over emails or some Zoom meetings? Or you were taking calls? How was it?
Yeah, I was in. I mean, I told her agent, who handles
Mm-hmm.
most stuff for her, for sure. I told him about it back actually in 2020,
Mm-hmm.
pretty early on, just to get their interest in it. And then
Mm-hmm.
yeah, what my plan was is to I traveled the tour basically in 2022,
Mm-hmm.
going to starting at least going to all the tournaments she went to. So I started, she played in
Mm-hmm.
Melbourne actually in the first
Yeah.
week of that season, and then the Australian Open, and then she went to Indian Wells, Miami, and
Mm-hmm.
Madrid, Rome, and I was there for all of it. And then it became tricky too because I was seeing less of her than I expected just at tournaments because she wasn't making a lot of deep runs except for Miami. And she was pulling out a bunch of tournaments with some injuries and stuff. And it wound up being a very
Mm-hmm.
listless, kind of directionless year from her results wise. And so, yeah, but my main method was just sort of shadowing her on the tour and talking to people,
Mm-hmm.
talking to her there at tournaments, and then also talking to other players about her as well, other people in the sport, other coaches and stuff. So it was a lot of voices and not just
Oh,
hers.
okay. So that's a lot of traveling, though.
Yeah, it was a lot of traveling for sure.
Mm-hmm. So to
And
the
I didn't
world.
travel, and I didn't travel at all in 2023, basically, as I was sort of working on actually writing the book.
Okay, so that's good to know. And also, we know, as far as the fan base knows the tennis world, we perceive her to be a really introvert athlete and a shy athlete. And how has that experience been during all the conversations? Do you think we will get to find and explore a new persona of her through your book?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think Naomi is at once very shy, but I think she's also very revealing at the same
Mm-hmm.
time. I think that she, you know, can speak softly sometimes or doesn't always, say
Yeah.
much, but when she does talk, I think it is actually very meaningful and very honest and very revealing. And so the value of sort of the quotes when she does talk, especially, in interview formats or in press conferences really can be great. And so definitely I think that she uh yeah, reveals a lot, and people who, and just the book is more about there are some new things in there for sure, but it's also just about sort of using the pieces we already have that were sort of, quick takes on one given day and were a story for a day and then forgotten, try to weave
Mhm.
all of that together into a more total picture, hopefully, that people can step back and look at and understand better.
And also, her story is pretty similar to that of Serena Williams. We
Mm-hmm.
all know that her father was inspired from Sir Richard Williams, the legendary coach of tennis. And later, he decided to put his daughters in tennis after he was inspired by watching the two sisters compete during the French Open finals of 2002. And also, he adapted the same blueprint as legendary Richard Williams. So do you also draw parallels between the two champions during their early life in tennis?
Absolutely, yeah. There's a lot they have in common. There's a chapter I have in the book called Sister Act Two, where it's sort of talking about how the Osakas very much were patterning themselves on the Williamses, and that was no secret. And they moved, to the U.S. to be like more like the Williamses from
Mm-hmm.
Japan, and then to Florida to follow more specifically in their footsteps geographically what
Mm-hmm.
the Williamses were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, definitely it is a thing. And certainly Naomi, who is the younger sister, sort of gravitated more toward Serena, and Mari, who is the older sister, gravitated more towards Venus. They had those natural sorts of roles, and there were lots of differences in their stories for sure as well. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
Williamses were much more successful playing, youth tournaments as kids, and they got a lot more attention from the media, and it was a very different sort of spectacle with the Williamses compared to the Osakas, who were really very under the radar until Naomi started having wins at the pro level.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Ben, please excuse me for a minute. We need to take a short break
Okay.
because one team members just texted me by saying there is some technical issue. So,
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
So, Abhijit, you can pause the recording and you can tell me what's happening. Okay.
Hello. My camera's on. Right, my camera's.
Yeah, but I see a frozen image.
Oh.
Yeah, I can
Oh.
see an image, but a frozen image throughout the interview.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah.
Like from today? Like, is it like my? I should be no, but the camera should be on. I turned it on. I see myself in this window, and it
Uh,
says when I look, it says using camera. You don't. Am I wearing like the blue striped shirt that I'm wearing
yes,
today? You see that? Okay.
yeah, I can see that, but I don't see you moving.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah, same here.
Huh. I have no idea. I have no idea what happened there. I I mean, there's a thing on my screen that says 99% uploading. So I don't
Uh,
know if it's maybe like I think there's something on Riverside. I don't know Riverside. I'm not an expert in Riverside, but I think the Riverside basically like it's sort of taking a video and it will send it to you.
mhm.
It's like higher video quality. It says there's a little thing that says if you hold over any of our windows, it says actual recording is higher quality than what you see. So I don't know if you just stopped, if you can look already at the video that we just did the first part and see if it's okay. It's
Okay,
possible there's just some lag or something, but I've had no problems with the connection on my side. I've seen Maha the entire time moving
okay,
live and everything, and I see myself moving live every time. So I don't know what
okay.
the
So
issue
we'll
is.
check out the recording later once we finish the interview.
Okay,
Okay.
sure. Yeah, sorry, but I didn't realize that wasn't. I had no idea there was an issue on that because I see everything's been totally fine on my end. So I
Okay.
apologize.
Abhijit, you can resume the recording and we can continue. Okay.
Okay,
Oh, okay. Thank you.
you want me to turn my camera on and off? Did that help? I mean, I can turn it
Maybe.
off briefly, and then now it's off,
Yes.
and now it's back on. I don't know if that makes a difference.
Back on. We don't see. I don't see you.
I see myself. I don't know what to do.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just we're obviously far apart. I don't know if it's on. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. It asked me if I was using headphones. I said yes. I mean, again, if you want to stop and look at the recording we have and see if it's okay,
Mhm.
that's fine. Otherwise, like I said, I see myself. It keeps saying whenever I mouse video, it says actual recording is higher quality than
Okay.
video. So
Maybe Abhijit in the. Okay. So Osaka's story is a bit similar to that of Serena Williams' story. Her father, Osaka's father, was inspired by Sir Richard Williams, who is the legendary coach in our sport. And also, if I'm not wrong, he was inspired while watching the Williams sisters compete during the finals of French Open in 2002. And that motivated him to push his daughters to train in tennis and take that sport professionally. So, do you draw parallels between the two players, Osaka and Serena's during the childhood tennis?
yeah, absolutely. I think you need to understand Serena and her story to understand Naomi because it was very obvious and very apparent and and not subtle that the Osakas and her father Leonard Francois was modeling his daughter's lives after the Williams sisters and what he saw on TV at the French Open.
Mhm.
And they moved the family from Japan to the U.S. and then down from New York to Florida within the U.S. Really to follow the Williams model in a lot of ways, and knowing that was the best uh, option for them, or thinking that was the best option for them, and yeah, and the sisters embraced it in their own ways too. I mean, Naomi was a huge Serena fan growing up, and still is a huge Serena fan, really, despite everything. And then played each other lots of times, and being pros, she still remains a huge Serena fan, like she was when she was a kid. And Mari, her older sister, is similarly a fan of the older sister Venus in the Williams sisters pairing. So yeah, it's a very, very natural thing for them for sure. There were lots of comparisons made, and people would, walk past their court when they're practicing in Florida and say, "Are you two the next Williams sisters?" to them a lot, because it's these two, girls practicing together with their father. So yeah, the comparisons are pretty obvious.
Absolutely. So, what are some similarities that you see between Serena and Naomi? I'm sure you know both of them very well by now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, both successful champions, both powerful players. Their games are a little similar, but not very similar in terms of their technique. They don't really have the most similar technique on court in terms of their shots and the mechanics of their games. They're not the most similar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's probably, I mean, some of the similarities are, I mean, Sasha Bayan, I know, who coached both of them, who was Naomi's coach when she won the US Open, and who coached Serena, or was a hitting partner for Serena, but kind of in a coaching role for a lot of years.
Mm-hmm.
He said once he thought the similarities weren't that much between them, and the biggest similarity is they both have, I think, big hair, is what he said.
Yeah.
So he didn't think the similarities were very serious in terms of them as athletes, and I understand that as well. I think as much as Naomi looks up to Serena, I think that a lot of Serena's personality and her the way she handles her emotions and the way she competes, I think it's different than Naomi for sure.
Yeah, and since you mentioned about Sasha Baijan, I have to tell you, like when he interviewed with us, he told me that he stayed with Williams sisters for almost 3 years in the same house.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he was like a big brother to them. They were like brothers, sisters, and they were helping each other out during that time.
Yeah, definitely. No, it was a family business. It basically was he wasn't the only one living there too. There was like at different points there was a physiotherapist or a assistant. It was when he first moved in. There's a chapter on Sasha when he arrives to in the book. So when he's coming on when he's starting with Naomi and gets a bit into his background with the Williamsons, it was a very very, like a lot of tennis relationships, maybe even more so. It was very close and very personal, spending all this time together, and Sasha was the same way while he was with Naomi as well.
Okay, so that's good to know. So speaking more about the book, were there any bottlenecks while you were writing the book, and also like in aspects of Naomi Osaka's life wherein she was hesitant to talk about?
I wouldn't say there's aspects of her life that she was hesitant to talk about. No, I think she's generally pretty open about things. The sort of challenges, as they were with the book, were more just about the uncertainty of her and trying to write this book about this person who was really moving and kind of drifting in and out of the sport, honestly, as I was writing it. And she's admitted now, end of 2022, that she was thinking about quitting the tennis because she just didn't have that same feeling for it and was really not totally there. And that was, I was in the middle of writing the book and trying to figure out what the ending of the book was. And it was very hazy, honestly, for a while there. So that was the trickiest part, I think, was just sort of not knowing how her story was going to end, or at least how her story was going to be captured at the time when this book needed to be finished and printed. And I think actually the pregnancy and the baby news made for a much cleaner ending in a lot of ways, made for a very natural break in her life, and something that she talks about too. This is sort of feeling like a second chapter or second act, whatever you want to call it, of her story.
You're mentioning about the end of her career, but I would like to ask you about the beginning of the career, which changed her life completely. So that was during US Open Finals 2018.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the controversial moments that we had in our sport. It was somewhat like a disgrace to our sport, I would say. And also it wasn't difficult. It was very difficult for Serena and also for Osaka. She couldn't handle what everything happened, the fiasco that had happened. And also, like, will we get to know some interesting anecdotes in that book? Because I know, like, Osaka once mentioned she was struggling with bouts of depression after that fiasco that took place in New York that year. So, are there any other aspects that we'll get to see about that moment?
Definitely, the 2018 US Open final is a whole chapter of itself, and in the book, and the aftermath of it is actually another chapter as well. Just sort of the huge media firestorm that started after that match. It was really a huge cultural flashpoint, especially in the US, but worldwide as well. Became about so many other things besides tennis, about discussions of race and gender and rules and fairness and all these things. And Naomi didn't really cause almost any of that directly, except for the fact that she was playing and beating Serena. And I think Serena being in a losing position in the match certainly had an effect on what was happening between her and the umpire. in that situation for sure. So it's interesting to see looking back on it. Yeah, I think, I've helped people who've read it said they sort of found more details of what was said, between Serena and the umpire, different sort of transcriptions of their conversation that I got from the court audio that maybe have been published before, details like that. And also, yeah, just understanding sort of the complexity of Naomi's emotions from that moment. And part of it that I think gets overlooked for why it was so tough for Naomi that day is that Naomi had to beat Serena to win her Grand Slam. And she was genuinely very sad to have to beat her favorite player as Serena was going for this record of 24 Grand Slams. Naomi didn't like that she was the one to stop that, as much as she wanted to win, and obviously never relented in that match while it was actually being played. Once she, hugged her at the net at the handshake, Naomi definitely said she felt a lot of emotions in that moment. So, and plus all the crowd obviously was a huge factor as well, and all the attention and stuff. And Naomi said it's sort of a bittersweet memory at times, that match. But yeah, but her feelings for Serena, I think, are maybe something that comes clearly through in the book, I hope.
Yeah, it was definitely a bittersweet memory and it was a new beginning for her. And also, she did not stop there in New York. She continued her run in Melbourne later the next year. And also, she became the world number one tennis player that year in 2019.
Yeah.
So yeah, and she's a superstar athlete. Like, people look up to her from other sports. Like, we want to be like Naomi Osaka. There are so many children who have picked up tennis rackets in Japan just because of Naomi Osaka. And also, like, people outside tennis, they recognize her a lot. So how does she manage professional tennis and entrepreneurship? Like, how does she balance between the two? And right now she has a new role in her life, which is being a full-time mother as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. She has always sort of craved, I think, a lot of outside opportunities. I think she kind of sees it as, obviously money is there and the money is real. And I think she can be competitive about the money too, and wanting to be, ranking well on these lists and things like that, and showing that as a sign of success off the court, these measurable metrics of the money. And she has been on top of highest paid female athlete lists several times before in the world. But also there's, I think, a sense for her that partnering with these businesses and these brands is a learning opportunity for her, because she did have this very sheltered childhood in a lot of ways. She didn't go to traditional school. She didn't know many people growing up. But now that she gets to work through brands, with designers, with other people, business people, about various companies or various ventures like that, I think she sees it as a form of education, as a form of broadening her horizons. It's something that she uses to take her mind off tennis, so that she's not just thinking about tennis constantly, which is very easy for a tennis player to do. And she still thinks about tennis a lot, for sure, but she likes having sort of designated time where she gets to think about design or business or whatever it might be, to sort of give her a bit more well-roundedness in her life sometimes.
All right. You talked about broadening her horizons. What is she really good at besides tennis?
I mean, tennis is something she's best at, for sure. Really good at. I mean, look, she's got interesting. I think a lot of people like her sense in fashion. She's got a very interesting fashion sense. It's a sort of interesting blend of sort of Japanese couture and sort of more American streetwear kind of things. And a lot of brands have responded to that and followed her in that. And yeah, her eye for things is great as well. And she's got a lot of things going on personality wise. I think she's very funny, and when she wants to be, and very relatable in those things. So yeah, she definitely has talents outside tennis. And I think also one of the things that she wants to do with the business stuff is also to sort of make sure she has a life set up for herself after whenever tennis stops, whenever that might be, that there are still businesses and opportunities for her afterwards.
That's amazing to know. And also, the people who created Naomi Osaka, we know about Mr. Leonard Francois, her father, who trained her in tennis. And also her mother, she played a pivotal role. And if I'm not sacrificed, she had to take multiple jobs. There were days when she slept in cars just in order to support both her daughters' tennis. So did you get to talk to her, meet her, and know her in person? And how much she has been influential in Osaka's career?
Yeah, Tamaki, her mother, is a huge part of Naomi's story, for sure, and a real driving force in Naomi's life. And that's something I really gained more appreciation for as I was writing the book. It's just how much Naomi was motivated. She said this several times, so sort of putting them all together in a line really makes it more clear, because she said it, once a year or so for a while. But basically, being motivated by her mother and seeing her mother's sacrifices and struggles that she had as during her childhood, when her mother was the only one working, when her father was not
Mm-hmm.
employed, was just sort of working with his daughters on court. There was a lot of pressure on
Mm-hmm.
Tamaki to provide for the family
Yeah.
as the single breadwinner, and also to fund this tennis dream as well. So
Mm-hmm.
to go above and beyond just the expenses, and yeah, working a lot of long hours, a lot of sacrifice. And that was one of Naomi's main motivations as she got on tour. And she said that being on tour, one of her biggest accomplishments was actually when she won Indian Wells, which is her first tour title in 2018. And after that, and with that prize money, and also with some of the endorsements that were going to come from it, her mother was able to retire from the workforce after that breakthrough. And that was a huge moment for Naomi, and really felt like she'd accomplished everything she wanted to, honestly, in her career, in a lot of ways, from that victory. And then actually, she had a bit of a struggle trying to find new motivation after that
Mm-hmm.
breakthrough. But yeah, that was a huge moment for Naomi, and has
Mm-hmm.
remained that way. I mean, now skipping ahead, now she's finding motivation in her daughter, Shy,
Mm-hmm.
but still the sort of idea of playing for family and playing for
Yeah.
their future and it's a very driving force for Naomi.
So Indian Wells 2018 was the place where she won her big title, and it was definitely, that definitely boosted her career, in fact. And also on the same court, unfortunately, if I'm not wrong, in 2022, Indian
Yeah.
Wells had one of the most difficult moments of her career. And also the fiasco which happened in 2021 at French Open. So, as a tennis journalist, what were your initial thoughts, and how did she handle that spotlight by
Yeah.
refusing to attend the press, and also when she was heckled at Indian Wells?
Yeah, those are pretty different instances. So I'll take them separately, but I think the 2022 in New Orleans actually is one of the opening chapters of the book. Just sort of that was sort of the biggest flashpoint that happened while
Okay.
I was talking. Well, I talked about how I was traveling that whole year, shadowing her, and that was the main incident that really happened that year,
Mhm.
was her Indian Wells match. And so that is one of the opening scenes of the book, just sort of to try to show how things had gotten so big for
Mhm.
Naomi, and also just in terms of the amount of attention and media on her, and then also how she was sort of losing a bit of, how she was struggling, how she was losing a bit of control over situations, and feeling lost, and just not sure what was going on. There was growing concern in her team and in her family about
Mhm.
what she should be doing, and she eventually started seeing a therapist after that Indian Wells 2022 match, and then she made the final of Miami the next week. So it was a pretty good bounce back from her on court, just in the on court level. But yeah, it was an interesting moment, and something that, just again, I think for Naomi, one of the things that was maybe want to write about her is just how polarizing she became. How people had these incredible, and that and the French Open incident, actually, that's where they are linked. Is that people had such incredibly strong reactions to her across sort of general predictable kind of cultural or political divides. Sometimes people saying either it's so great that Naomi is in touch with her emotions and being sensitive and looking out for herself, and it's a model we all should do to take better care of ourselves, and self-care and mental
Mhm.
health. And that was one side of it, and the other side was saying, why is she being so weak, or a victim, or she should be tougher, and how can she be struggling so much when she makes so much money? Those are sort of the other side of the conversation, and that conversation centered around her very loudly around
Mhm.
the 2021 French Open. Most of all, probably that was when she was probably getting the most attention of her life, ironically, at the time when she wanted the least attention, when she really thought that she could just sort of mitigate and just say, if I step back from press conferences, which are causing me stress in this
Mhm.
very stressful moment of my life. She had the Olympics coming up. It was a big factor in that. That was only a few months before the Tokyo Olympics, where she was going to be the torchbearer. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was a moment that she probably miscalculated a bit, but it was still just kind of crazy how big and vast those moments that are pretty small, both of them really. Like Naomi gets heckled on court, or Naomi decides to break a rule about press conferences. Like, those on paper shouldn't be huge stories, but they became these huge headline stories around the world
Mhm.
on all sorts of general news websites, not just sports,
Mhm.
because of the place Naomi occupied in the
Mhm.
culture. And so that's something I wanted to explore in the book, is like why this person, this tennis player, became so culturally resonant and divisive and polarizing.
Yeah. And also, people outside other sports like NBA, for that matter, athletes stepped up and they spoke about the similar issue which they were facing.
Definitely. Yeah, no, Naomi, a lot of athletes in other sports are tennis fans. That's actually one thing I don't have as much of in the book as I could have, because I had to cut, it's a very long book, so I had to cut a bunch for length. But other athletes talking about Naomi and what she's meant to them is very real in basketball and other sports. Simone Biles famously mentioned Naomi when she stepped back from Olympic competition. And yeah, her legacy is pretty clear in that front.
All right. So, and also in her recent interviews in Brisbane, we see a regenerated Naomi Osaka. She is completely different right now, oozing positivity all over. And also, she is showing her gratitude to her fans and the sport. And a fresh Naomi Osaka has come to Australia this year. So, did you personally see the change in her game and the process of writing the book? And did motherhood have a role?
Yeah, I think that Naomi, first of all, we're still getting to know her as a mother. She hasn't been on tour that long, so we'll still see how this chapter of her life, this act two of her career, you want to call it that, or second set, whatever cute term people come up with for her career here. You know how this all looks. We're still getting to know her in this new role, and she's getting to know herself too. And so obviously this first week in Brisbane was very positive. She seems like she's in a very good mood. Seems very light, because a lot of times with Naomi, when it was toughest for her, it was very heavy, right? She felt like she had all this weight on her, all this pressure on her, and it doesn't seem to be the case right now. She seems to be playing with a degree of calm and satisfaction, and playing really well. I mean, the two matches she played in Brisbane were very, very high quality, especially the match against Pliskova. Just in terms of her statistics and how she was hitting the ball, she was incredible. So all of that's very positive. And yeah, she has said, it's sort of the last chapter of the book. It's her as a mom that she's feels, that she's being kinder to herself and gentler to herself and nicer to herself. And that's something, that people can see in her on court, that she does have this lightness about her. Yeah. So we don't know how that's going to continue. Obviously as pressure increases, as bigger tournaments come, as losses come, as wins come, because both can be difficult to process in their own way. And we'll see how it goes. But definitely the early signs, she lots of optimism, and the tennis itself is great. That's the main sort of, I think, revelation more than anything from this first week in Brisbane, is that she just looks really good on the court.
So it's once again a Grand Slam month. I think almost 3 weeks of lot of tennis for all the fans, and it will be a little bit difficult for the fans in Asia and also in North America. So, as female tennis players, like as mothers, nobody, I think, after Kim Clijsters, none of them have managed to win a Grand Slam, and that includes Serena Williams. She was there 4 times at the doorstep, but she fell short of 2 sets. So this year, do you think Naomi Osaka has a chance to pull it off and to enter that club?
I think she has a chance for sure from what we're seeing. I mean, I'm not going to say it's a guarantee that she's going to do it, but she certainly has a chance with how she's playing. And yeah, Serena couldn't do it. Azarenka hasn't done it so far. And one of the things that Serena and Azarenka have in common for their motherhood, falling short, is they both lost to Naomi Osaka in a Grand Slam final as mothers. I mean, there's great young players coming up all the time, and it's not just about Naomi. It's also about whoever her competition is across the net.
Yeah.
So it's not totally Naomi's destiny to choose, but when she's at her best, I do think that she remains one of the best. I think we saw that in Brisbane already, and that was a pretty clear reminder of what she's capable of. So yeah, I'm excited to see what she can do, and she seems motivated, and if she does, it would be an incredible accomplishment for sure.
Speaking about your career, it has been interesting to follow, like everybody whosoever follows tennis, they know Ben Rothenberg on Twitter. So you were never shy about expressing your views on any questions or asking tough questions to all the elite tennis players on tour. So would you like to share some moments from the press conferences or the interviews that you have done wherein the player has put you in an uncomfortable position?
I don't know that I have any real answers that come to mind. I mean, I think that I agree with what you said, that I'm less shy or less hesitant about asking tough questions for sure. I 99% of the time, I think players understand it's part of the job, and certainly the more I mostly deal with players who are at the top of the sport, honestly, who have seen me a lot. And no, it hasn't been. It usually is okay. I mean, obviously, and lots of players have testy moments at general times after they've lost or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it might be, or some other things going on in their career, in their lives that makes them more agitated.
Mm-hmm.
But no, nothing, no examples are coming to mind, honestly, for me. But yeah, but I think that, yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate that you see that I'm not shying away from stuff. I think a lot of people can sometimes, and a lot of people are afraid of, yeah, of upsetting players or of shaking things up too much and just want it to
Yeah.
be comfortable.
And also, besides traveling, what are the challenges as a tennis journalist you face while covering the sport?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big sport. It's very spread out. I mean, there's basically in a Grand Slam, there's 128 men, 128 women in the singles draws, and I mostly
Yeah.
only cover singles. And that's, they all have their own individual stories and their own individual paths and trajectories and journeys, and that you
Mm-hmm.
need to sort of understand on some level
Mm-hmm.
to cover the sport. And that's a challenge, but also a big opportunity that there are so many stories out there that you can tell, and that can be very different a lot of times than a team sport. Let's say when you're just covering most of the team, and it's more, and usually it's harder to isolate an individual and a person and tell a story. And I think the book, obviously, the Naomi Osaka book, is a sort of extreme example of that, of finding one person's story and diving deep into it in a way that I think is fascinating. But yeah, it's different to yeah, to being in a team sport. So there's opportunity, but also just a lot of quantity in terms of matches, long days. You
Agree.
know, certainly covering a Grand Slam, I'm about to do again in Australia. Like, it's, you know, it starts 11 a.m. and goes till after 1 a.m. usually, and for that roughly for 14 days in a row. So that can get pretty 15 now, because the Australian Open added the Sunday start. So it's going to be pretty exhausting.
Yeah. So, according to many journalists and many tennis experts, we get to hear that tennis is a dying sport right now. What are your thoughts on it? And do you think tennis needs to undergo some kind of transformation in order to attract more and more audience, sporting audience?
I don't know that I wouldn't say it's a dying sport. I don't think it's at its peak of its health right now, but I wouldn't say dying seems a little dramatic. I
Okay.
wouldn't say dying. No, I think there's still a pretty healthy fan base and business base for tennis, even if it's not at its best. I don't think it's dying.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that there's, just in terms, I think it's a very star driven sport.
Mm-hmm.
Largely, I mean, so many people, before they say they're tennis fans, or, I mean, their main allegiance has been to
Mm-hmm.
Roger or to Rafa or to Serena, and those people. Well, Rafa's coming back now, but generally they weren't. None of them were really in the sport in 2023. Let's say, for the most part, and that's a big challenge for the sport, because, you know, you need to renew and recycle. And I think that's actually one of the things I write in the book. I think in 2023, actually, men's and women's combined, I think there's probably almost never been fewer household names in the sport than
Yeah.
ever before, just because we had those three players, like I mentioned, not on tour. Naomi was not on tour in 2023. Ash Barty had retired.
Yeah.
Venus Williams even was barely around on tour. Novak was playing. Novak was the one person who was a household name, probably, who was on tour in 2023. But that's only one person, you know. So that's not as much as we usually have. And usually there's been this continuity
Mm-hmm.
in the sport. And so because those players were all winning so much and getting over 20 Grand Slams, you know, there hasn't been as much room for new players to emerge and really build big legacies and followings for themselves. I mean, Alcaraz is starting, but he's still very new. So I do think that the sport, and it's just the sport can control the results, you know, and so that's somewhat down to luck. And then also, yeah, I do think there are things that the sport can do in terms of being more TV friendly or fan friendly. Certainly, making streaming is a big issue in lots of countries. Having different channels and different subscriptions needed to watch the tournament, something that could unite the broadcast, I think would be a big help. And then, yeah, then I do think that there are, you know, a bunch of things that make it tough to watch just on a time level, in terms of how people are deciding where to spend their entertainment time, whether it's watching sports or, you know, competing against TVs, movies, YouTube. Those are all competitors to tennis as a viewing product. Even though people don't think of YouTube as being a competitor to tennis, it is. You know, those are conversations people in the sport are having, and trying to find out ways to make it easier, because it's tough. You know, tennis is one of the most inconvenient sports to follow as a fan, going all different time zones. You don't know when your favorite's going to play until usually the day before. Then it might be at some odd hour. If you're really dedicated, you might have to wake up or stay up late, and it can be very, very disruptive to your life in a way that most sports are not this inconvenient. Most sports do not force their fans to disrupt their lives so much to be an ardent follower of the sport. And so being global, I think almost everyone talks about being global as a positive, but it's also a huge challenge as a
Absolutely.
product to be so all over the place and not to really sit still like a domestic league in any given country would.
Yeah, absolutely. Like speaking about F1, if I had to draw parallels, so after
Yeah.
the Netflix series had come Drive to Survive, the viewership of F1 had skyrocketed,
Yeah.
at least in the North America.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think the Drive to Survive equivalent in our sport is the breakpoint, maybe?
Well, they're trying. That's obviously what they're trying to do, and I don't think
Mm-hmm.
it hasn't had the numbers of F1. And also, I think it's different in the US because F1 really was almost completely unknown. It
Yeah,
really was coming from almost nothing in the US before
yeah,
Breakpoint and really shot up
yeah.
after that. Whereas tennis was much more familiar to people. So tennis, I don't think people are watching tennis being like, I want to understand this exotic foreign thing to me. Let me find this. And so, and also it's just a different product as a sport. I mean, it's not like as
Mhm,
loud or as dangerous or doesn't have, and I think the F1 series has a lot more drama built into it in terms of competition and rivalries and stuff than the Breakpoint really did not have very much drama in that kind of sense. It was more about players. In the first season, anyway, it was a lot more about players having kind of interior struggles and their own emotions and how tough it is and how lonely it is. Was sort of more the overarching theme of Breakpoint, which is true. I don't know. I don't really know how Breakpoint. I don't know if they've done studies or what the answers are on this. I don't know how much Breakpoint is or isn't affecting tennis
mhm.
fandom. I don't get the sense that a lot of fans are coming to the sport from watching Breakpoint, but maybe
Yeah.
they're just not the ones I'm seeing on social media or talking to in
Mhm,
person. Because certainly a lot of, as much as tennis is struggling as a TV product, as I mentioned, without a lot of the household names and viewership numbers are not great a lot of times on TV.
mhm.
It is doing really well a lot of times as in person. I think that's also partially a post-pandemic thing. People really want to get to in-person events, and there's a sort of premium on that. And
Mhm.
the U.S. Open, for example, was getting crazy amounts of attendance, way too much. It was actually really overcrowded at the U.S. Open. It was unpleasant in 2023. So that's something that they maybe that's some of that interest is from Breakpoint. I don't know, but I don't get the sense that it's really directed. And also the other thing, people talk
Mhm.
about this Netflix curse, but it is real that the players who were featured on Breakpoint season 1 did not have great seasons in
Yeah.
2023. So there wasn't this chance which is a problem for the sport actually. I mean, it's funny, but it's also a problem for the business that like you become a fan of Alex Tomjanovic or Nick Kyrgios or Matteo Berrettini. None of
Mhm.
them were really on tour very much in 2023, and so it's there's no continuity and no sort of ability to link your Netflix fave to your
Mhm.
encore fave. I don't get the sense that
Mhm.
those viewers are being converted into watching live tennis on TV too much.
Yeah. Mhm. I totally get your point. Speaking about the household name, world number one tennis player, Mr. Djokovic. So
Mm-hmm.
you have really been vocal about his vaccination stance on Twitter. So and also you have received quite a lot of hatred from his fan base, the Noel fan,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately. So, did you ever hesitate from speaking what was there on your mind because of the social media attention that you got?
Not so much what was on my mind. I probably did just start tweeting less in general because almost anything I would say about him, positive or negative, would get sort of blown out of proportion. Even anytime I say positive things about him, which is 90 something percent of what I say about him is positive or certainly at worst neutral, would people like, oh, wow, you finally, this huge exaggerated reaction because of this honestly fairly limited, when people tell me we've been critical about Djokovic, it was isolated to sort of his vaccine
Mhm.
and scientific views, if you want to say that too, and his public stances on those, and how I thought those were not
Mhm.
helpful during the global pandemic. And I still think that, but it's also kind of in the past now. The issue was that the pandemic kept going and that it kept being a lingering issue for Djokovic. I mean, Djokovic couldn't play the 2023 even in the Miami tournaments still because of this vaccine stance. So it really did become, it was very relevant to the sport competitively. I mean, there are
Mhm.
different champions, I'm sure, at some of these events
Mhm.
that Djokovic missed because Djokovic couldn't play because of the vaccine rules. I mean, it really did
Yeah.
have a very material impact on the sports, and it's very possible. Certainly, with he missed, I guess, just 2 Grand Slams, and he missed the 2022 Australian Open and U.S. Open because of the vaccine stance. He probably would have won at least one of those had he been playing both of those events. And you never know how things would change if he's
Yeah.
more tired or less tired, whatever. But he, it definitely did change the sport and competitively, and it was a relevant story. And I did think that, everything that Craig Tiley set up as the Australian Open director for his exemption in 2022, that's sort of where I thought that was all very flimsy and very poorly calculated by Tiley, and really set up Djokovic to fail massively in terms of the Australian public, and just they never should have an exemption program. Period. Looking back, I mean, that was not that whether or not Djokovic qualified for it or not, there just should not have been an exemption program for this tournament, especially because anyway. So getting into the details of that, I was on the ground covering that, and it was very much a part of that whole saga when it was unfolding, which was a fascinating moment because it was this crazy, again, it was like Naomi several times. It was Novak in the global spotlight. And actually, I do have a section where Naomi talks about that, just sort of how she could sympathize almost with Novak in that moment, because she knows what it's like to be the player who everyone is talking about, and it's not a pleasant feeling. So Djokovic had that for sure. Djokovic did that to himself. He made that choice that kept being an issue for years, somewhat ridiculously. And yeah, I don't necessarily. I've moved on. I think it's over. I think the pandemic. It's not obviously there's still COVID, unfortunately, in the world, and people are still having it. And hopefully, I don't get it. On my trip coming up here before that even. But the world has kind of moved on. I've certainly moved on. I think hopefully Novak has moved on, and his fans maybe have not moved on, but that's up to them. I mean, they're I think there's something about Djokovic fans just in their personalities that I think makes them more contrarian or more sort of anti everything, and just they sort of love that Djokovic is the disruptive guy, is the one who came in and broke up the Federer Nadal thing, and they sort of have these rebellious, disruptive personalities that they gravitate towards. I don't think it's a coincidence, and so I think that they have some of that, and that's been sometimes hard for them to let go of that sort of feeling of wanting to fight and to battle and to argue all the time, even though their guy's clearly the best. I mean, that's the thing. Like, Djokovic is so clearly statistically the best player of all time by any metric you want to come up with, having won 24 Grand Slams, having won every Masters event at least twice. He's, I think, only Monte Carlo is it away from having won all of them 3 times. Yeah, so that's incredible. Honestly, that's incredible. No one else has done it once.
Yes.
And he's almost completed his 3rd lap of this. So there's so much for them to be happy about and proud of. And I just wish they could wear that with a little bit more lightness and joy sometimes, because they make it seem like it's so hard to be a Novak fan, and it really shouldn't be. I mean, he's just better than everybody. So enjoy it.
I think there's one big laurel which is missing from his resume, which is the gold medal at Olympics.
Sure.
So I think Djokovic has 7 more months right now to fulfill that missing laurel.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's not a big part of tennis, because obviously tennis is not the most prestigious event compared to a lot of other sports where it is the pinnacle event. But yeah, that's right. He has not done great at the Olympics. He has not largely been his best in sort of national team competitions. Actually, it's not where he's usually or playing for Serbia. It's usually not where his best tennis is. He did win Davis Cup before, but generally it's not his best. And so yeah, it's interesting to see. That Tokyo did not expect him to collapse in that tournament the way he did. And he's coming 4th in the Olympics twice. So that kind of shows that he's just not his best in these medal rounds. It's a different kind of pressure for sure. Yeah. So yeah, if there is a knock on him, it is that, I guess.
So yeah, all the best to him. So yeah, speaking about tennis, if you see geographically you at it, it is heavily dominated in the North America, moving on then Europe, and then also like one whole month in Australia. And also there are a few tournaments which are taking place in Asia. But right now, what the bodies are deciding is to move tennis to Saudi Arabia. So, and also like you have also been quite vocal about it, calling out Billie Jean King to support this controversial move. Do you believe that tennis will benefit from this move?
I don't know if I was calling out Billy. I think I saw that you were. Yes, I saw that was about. That was more just sort of saying I wasn't totally surprised by her having support for the Saudis, even if that was shocking to a lot of people given her history with feminism and women's rights and stuff. I do think also she's always been very business centric in tennis, and she has done, especially early in the 70s, she was doing a lot of starting her own tournaments and tours and league, the World Team Tennis League, and she did a lot of different stuff like that. And so she is very business oriented in the sport too. So there is this big business opportunity in Saudi Arabia, which she's not I think it's in her personality to be interested in business and you know, chances for growth and for profit and all those things. You know, she's not directly a stakeholder right now in women's tennis financially in that same way. It's a big conversation for sure. You know, there's a lot of talk about some big, huge disruptive changes and big reforms and big restructurings happening to tennis. That's all going to be really hard. I mean, people have talked about saying that tennis is broken for decades, really pretty much since tennis started. I don't think anyone ever thought in the history of pro tennis, which is only about, you know, 55 years old, give or take right now. I don't think anyone ever thought that it's set up perfectly. I don't think anyone ever thought this is great. It's always kind of been a bit subpar. It's always been a bit unsatisfying to different people. And it's going to take, but because there are these different, I call them the 7 kingdoms of tennis, basically, that are like the 4 Grand Slams, the men's tour, the women's tour, and the ITF. And they all control their own different part of the terrain of the landscape, and they're very reluctant to give up any sort of power or control over that. And it would take something really, really powerful, which could be potentially some ridiculous amount of Saudi money, potentially like talking billions of dollars. The Saudis want to put that up across the board to really move those barriers and to really meaningfully change things. And so we'll see if that happens, but it's not going to be easy, and it's going to, you know, it's going to also, there's all these conflicting views where people talk. There's the main conversation happening within the sort of tours is wanting to make a more premium product, which is saying basically to be a bit like F1, to have fewer, have more big events like the Masters level and Grand Slam events, and have them all kind of be a circuit that just the top players play. But then really sort of eliminate the lower. But also at the same time, there's also this talk, which is maybe more hollow, I don't know, about wanting to help more players make a living in the sport and help lower ranked players make money. And those two things do not go together. You cannot restrict the amount of players on this tour and also pay more players more widely. You kind of have to pick one or the other. And so those are competing interests, even if they're not being presented as such. So we'll see how it all goes. We'll see how much the Saudi money is real, how much they want to throw down, and how much they want to change it, and also how much cooperation there can be, because it's a very fractured sport right now on a lot of different levels.
And also for WTA, they have been struggling to market their players, be it the tournaments, the viewership, everything. And when it comes to revenue numbers, they are far behind the ATP Tour. So do you think the shift to Saudi Arabia will benefit the WTA Tour in terms of revenue?
It depends on what the money is. Yeah, it depends on what the offer is, and it depends on what they do with that money. I do think that marketing is a big place where the WTA is definitely falling short and should be more of a priority. They're putting all this emphasis on equal prize money right now as their main drive of saying it's going to be equal within a few years at the tour level, which is great. Obviously, no one's against that. But at the same time, they're not spending money on marketing and selling the sport to make it more valuable. So then the just increases in prize money without increasing the value of the product can feel a little bit hollow or in the wrong direction, because usually the profit should come and then the pay should increase, is how most businesses would work. So it's complicated, and I do think that you look at what the ATP has done with Tennis TV, which has been an ATP only product for many years now, and the amount of marketing and videos and content they do for just men's tennis has been, I think, great for fans. And women's tennis could desperately use some of that creative energy and budget, you know, to make all those things that Tennis TV has been doing. Women are lacking that severely, whether it's only a lack of budget or also a lack of creativity or initiative. Probably both on some level, but it's definitely the budget. So I would make that a business priority for women's tennis for sure, to give it a chance to spotlight the personalities of players the way that the men have had on these platforms.
Okay. All right, Ben, it was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thanks for having me, Ma. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I wish you a very happy journey to Australia. I know it's a long flight from New York.
Yeah, I'm in DC, so it's like basically like 6 hours to LA, and then probably like 14 hours from LA to Melbourne, something like that. So it's a long trip.
Okay, so yeah, I wish you good luck and enjoy it, and thanks for all the coverage and the information that you provide on a daily basis.
Thank you, Ma. I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks for being with us.